The best thing about competitive Pokemon singles, in my opinion, is the sheer variety of different formats you can play. Unlike competitive doubles, which is the official rule set standardized around one format at a time, in competitive singles, various different formats exist at the same time. And if you're bored with one, you can just play another, where the rules are completely different, the viable Pokemon are completely different, and it's like a whole new world. In this video, I would like to go through and explain every Gen 9 competitive singles format that is available to play on the Pokemon Showdown ladder right now for free. And why don't we start at the top with the highest power level format in the game that does not involve modding or hacking, of course. The format Anything Goes. Anything Goes is a very self-explanatory format. This is a Pokemon format with no rules at all. You can do whatever you want here, as long as it exists in the game. The most powerful legendaries in the game, no matter how broken, are free to use. Most Pokemon formats, including official rule sets, have something called the Species Clause in place, where you can't use more than one of the same Pokemon on a team. This is pretty universal, but in Anything Goes, I can run a team of 6 Miraidons if I want, and nobody can stop me. Those dastardly Smogon elites that try to restrict my teams, they don't have any power here. I can run 6 Miraidons, and they're powerless to do anything about it. Most standard competitive singles formats have clauses in place to prevent you from using evasion boosting moves like Double Team. One-hit KO moves, which are inaccurate, but if they land, will always one-hit KO the enemy. The move Baton Pass is also restricted in most competitive singles formats for its ability to create game-breaking stat pass chains, but in Anything Goes, all of this stuff is perfectly legal. It is the Wild West of competitive Pokemon formats. When I played a bit of this format, I ran 6 Mucks, all with Minimize. I had surprisingly successful results with my 6 Muck team, but I will say that Dog Offense was a poor matchup for me. I should have factored in this matchup when I had built the team. There are also some Pokemon that are only usable in this tier, because they are so powerful that this is the only place where their power can be contained. There are very few Pokemon that fit this description. In Gen 9, there are 2 Pokemon that you can only use in the Anything Goes tier. Those are Calyrex Shadow Rider and Miraidon. These 2 are only available to use in Anything Goes, so this is another reason to play this format, is to use these Pokemon that are banished to this specific tier and only usable in this specific tier due to their overwhelming power. I think the perception of Anything Goes for most players is that it's a novelty format. It's a place where they can try out ridiculous strategies or absurdly broken things in a contained environment. But not that many people treat it as a serious metagame. Some players do. There are some dedicated Anything Goes players, but it doesn't appeal to most people due to the fact that it's a bit too chaotic, and formats with a bit more restrictions and bans and clauses tend to feel more balanced with more variety in what you can use. In Anything Goes, yes, you can use anything in the game, but when the most powerful Pokemon in the game are available to use without restriction, the metagame tends to lean towards those Pokemon and those Pokemon alone, as they are so powerful that they completely over-centralize things. Now folks, I did say that Anything Goes has no rules whatsoever. That's not entirely true. There is one rule in place, and that is the Endless Battle Clause. If you're not aware, there are ways to force the opponent into an endless battle in Pokemon. The most famous way to do so is with the Pokemon Slowbro, who can use the combination of Recycle and Leper Berry to have infinite PP, can trap the enemy with Block, and then when the enemy runs out of PP, they heal Pulse to heal the enemy so they don't die from the Struggle Recoil. With this combination, Slowbro can force the battle to go forever, literally. So this is the singular thing that you're not allowed to do in Anything Goes, which means that not anything goes. Technically, they're lying to us. They lied to us. A single thing does not go. But the only thing banned is not something that's too powerful, it's something that is a form of griefing that exists purely to waste the enemy's time and force an endless battle. Which is really something that should be patched out of the game itself or something like that, but it does exist and it's a very dishonorable thing to do. I can't imagine anyone actually doing this and trapping someone in purgatory. That would be terrible. Who would do such a thing? Who would ever do that? Up next we have the Ubers tier. Ubers is quite similar to Anything Goes. This is a place where you are able to use many of the most powerful legendaries in the game without restriction, like Koraidon, Arceus, Zacian Crown, etc. However, there is much more law and order in place in the Ubers tier. Various clauses are in place, including of course the Endless Battle Clause, but also we have the Species Clause, where a player cannot have 2 Pokemon with the same species on a team. And this is a rule that is also in place in official Pokemon tournaments. So this is not a Smogon exclusive, this is a rather universal one, otherwise people would spam 6 Incineroars or something in VGC, or you'd have absurd strategies like 6 Arceus. So this makes sense, of course, for variety. You can only have 1 of a species at a time, and it's worth noting that regional forms actually count as the same species, so you cannot have Dugtrio and Dugtrio Alola on the same team, since they are the same species. They're both Dugtrio. That's worthy of note. Ubers also has the Sleep Clause in place, which means that only 1 Pokemon on either side of the field can be put to sleep at a time. This prevents you from spamming sleep moves and en masse preventing the enemy from acting with a fast sleep setter. And this is not a clause that Smogon made up themselves, this is actually a clause that existed all the way back in Pokemon Stadium that has been borrowed and enforced on most Smogon formats since then. The Evasion Clause is also in place, which bans the use of evasion boosting moves such as Double Team or Minimize. These are moves that boost yourself with evasion and increase the chance that enemy attacks will miss. These are viewed as uncompetitive as they increase variance and are just frustrating to play against and not very epic, not very fun. The one-hit KO move clause also exists, banning the use of moves such as Fissure, Guillotine, and Horn Drill, which can simply one-hit KO the enemy. These are inaccurate moves with only 30 accuracy, but if they do land, they simply eliminate your entire Pokemon, also viewed as a massive swing that is kind of just fishing for good luck, so they are banned as a result. I also think that beyond just these moves existing to fish for good luck, they are kind of overpowered actually. Yes, 30% chance is quite low, but the reward for landing it is massive, and when you think about other 30% secondary effects on attacks like Body Slam or Scald, the reward for those is just a status ailment, which is very good, and it's worth going for such an effect. But one-hit KO moves just get a straight-up Pokemon KO. So I think on bulky Pokemon that can afford to fish for these moves, they would actually be broken and would land in battles fairly frequently and just get free KOs, which would not be very fun to deal with, in my opinion. There are also 2 moves banned from Ubers. The move Baton Pass, which is a move that switches you out to an ally and also passes all of your stat boosts on to that ally. This is banned because Baton Pass can be used to create unbreakable chains of stat passing, utilizing mechanics like Taunt and Magic Bounce to ensure that the stats do not go away and you just Baton Pass to an absolutely broken Pokemon that sweeps in the end. Baton Pass has proven game-breaking in many generations in a row. You can almost solve Pokemon with Baton Pass, and create teams that are near unbeatable when they get going. The move Last Respect is also banned, and this is one that took a while to get banned, and it is actually kind of an unprecedented moment in Ubers where an attack has been banned, but Gen 9 Ubers banned Last Respects because it was just that ridiculously overpowered, and the whole meta was centering around it in an unhealthy manner. Last Respect is a 50 power ghost type attack that ramps in power by 50 extra power for each of your fainted allies. If your whole team is fainted, this move has 300 base power, which is so ludicrously high that it even often one-hit KOs resisted Pokemon. The chief abuser of this was Basculegion, who could carry adaptability to boost the stab damage on Last Respects even further for even more absurd damage output. So the whole meta centered around basically sacrificing your whole team so that Basculegion could just click Last Respects and kill everything. And it could one-hit most things in the game. The only real reprieve against it was Terra Normal, or a normal type Pokemon. And yes, there are some, but it's just a very skewed scenario where a single thing stops this absurd attack. Very much similar to Dracovish with Physius Rend, but I think even more ridiculous than that was, where the counterplay to it was pretty much non-existent. And so in an unprecedented turn of events, an attacking move is banned from Ubers, something that has never happened before. One item is also banned from being used in Ubers, and that is the item King's Rock, which is an item that increases the flinch chance on attacks that do not have flinch chance by default, and it grants them a 10% flinch chance. The reason this is banned is because it can be used with multi-hit moves such as Icicle Spear, and when it is used with that, each individual hit of the multi-hit move will have a 10% flinch chance. When Cloyster uses Icicle Spear in King's Rock, it has skill link, which means Icicle Spear always hits 5 times, and each hit of the Icicle Spear has 10% flinch chance. This results in something like a 43% flinch chance on a very powerful Icicle Spear. The ethos of banning things like this is often just that they don't add anything meaningful beyond fishing for good outcomes. And yes, there are moves like Ice Beam that have 10% freeze chance, which 10% of the time has a massive impact, game-winning impact, but the difference is that Ice Beam is used just generally as an Ice-type special attack, not only for going for freezes. Whereas King's Rock has no real reason to exist beyond just fishing for a flinch on moves that don't have flinch chance. And therefore it doesn't really have a good justification for existing or adding something important to the format. So most agree that banning it just improves the experience. And maybe you disagree with this philosophy, and that's fine, but if you do disagree with this philosophy, that's why Anything Goes exists. That's the tier for you, probably, if you want a world where nothing is banned and everything's on the table. Ubers is trying to be like a more balanced, in inverted commas, version of Anything Goes. And part of that is banning things like the King's Rock and Double Team, etc. Beyond that, of course, as mentioned before, there are 2 Pokemon banned from being used in Ubers, those being Miraidon and Calyrex Shadow Rider. Other than that, though, it is a very unrestricted format. I know that me saying all of that sounded like a lot, but it's not a lot, and Ubers is a very high power level format, where you can use most things in the game. And it does center around the most powerful legendaries in the game, such as Koraidon, Arceus, and Kyogre. These are the top dogs here. Some players enjoy this sort of metagame that is very centered around extremely powerful Pokemon because that centralization brings with it a strong sense of structure. There are Pokemon that are the center of the universe, and then Pokemon prop up to counter those, and everything makes sense in that way. The metagame is very clearly defined oftentimes in Ubers, and some enjoy this and actually view this as quite balanced. I tend to agree with that, and I think that Ubers is often quite a fun metagame to play, where sometimes interesting things can be viable because they specifically counter a top legendary. For example, Skeledirge is quite good in Ubers because of its positive matchup against things such as Zacian, Crowned, and Arceus. Pokemon that are tiered as Ubers ranked Pokemon are often given this title by default. Pokemon like Kyogre, Groudon, Palkia are clearly on a level above other Pokemon, and so are preemptively labeled as Uber. But some Pokemon earn the title as a result of being banned from the tier below Ubers. Pokemon such as Fluttermane, who is the past Paradox form of Misdreavus. This Pokemon is extremely powerful, and is actually on the level of many legendaries in its power. It was briefly allowed in the tier below, but was quickly banned. Same with Baxcalibur and Palafin. These are Pokemon that are not legendaries, but have still earned the Uber rank and are only allowed to be used in the Uber tier. Speaking of the tier below, we now finally reach the overused tier. This is the most popular competitive singles format, because it has the most approachable power level. These are Pokemon that are very powerful, but not quite as powerful as the legendaries that reside in Ubers. And this is also where usage-based tiering begins. Usage-based tiering is a system that Smogon uses to categorize Pokemon into different power levels and formats. For a Pokemon to be ranked in OU, they need to have at least a 4.52% usage in the OU tier. If they do not have such a usage, they will fall down to the lower tier. The tier below is called underused, and the same applies there. If you have a 4.52% usage in the underused tier, you are ranked as an underused Pokemon. If you fall below that, you fall to the lower tier, and so on and so on. The Pokemon series has a problem where there is a massive disparity in power levels. Some Pokemon are far weaker than others, and there are also a lot of Pokemon in that middle range of sort of powerful but a little bit average. So oftentimes in official VGC doubles, so much of the available Pokemon is never used there because they have no reason to exist there. They're underpowered or outclassed by other things. So this usage-based tiering system is an attempt to give more Pokemon a place to exist by having multiple different formats that exist at different power levels. And OU is the top of the usage-based tiers. If you are ranked in OU as a Pokemon, this is a mark of respect and it is a sign that you are probably quite a good Pokemon. Gen 9 OU has been quite a controversial format, actually, as it has been very difficult to balance and there is a lot of disagreement about how the balancing of the format should be handled. Gen 9 introduced significant power spikes, some of the most powerful regular non-legendary Pokemon we've ever seen, like Fluttermane, Palafin, Annihilate, etc. Some of the most powerful moves we've ever seen, including Last Respect and Shed Tail. The Terra mechanic, which serves to really embolden boost sweepers, and also provide them with the universal coverage of Terra Blast. Gen 9 was clearly not designed with the balance of 6v6 singles competitive in mind, because this is an unofficial fan community that plays this format, and they're not really too concerned with whether all the stuff present in the game is too powerful or not for this format. Last Respect is a prime example of this, a move that can achieve 300 power in a 6v6 singles game very easily, while in a doubles game there are not 6 Pokemon on your team and therefore the move is far less powerful. Controversial choices have been made in this tier, such as the early decision not to ban Terra. This was a very close vote. The community does vote on some of these rules, this was one of them. And the decision not to ban Terra was the one that just barely came out on top in that vote. Due to the increased power level, some Pokemon from Ubers were actually unbanned, including Darkrai and Zamazenta, and this was controversial. A lot of people think this shouldn't have happened. Sleep moves were banned entirely. You cannot click a sleep move anymore in Gen 9. In any format below Ubers, a lot of people didn't like this decision. This was enforced without a community vote. Recently, Terra Blast, the move that can be used alongside Terastallization to transform into any type and become physical or special. This move was also banned completely. Not to mention a ridiculous amount of Pokemon bans, more than we have ever seen, which I have a whole very long video about, if you're interested, called Every Gen 9 Pokemon Ban Explained. Back when usage-based tiering began, in the Generation 4 games, things were not so complicated. Only 2 Pokemon were actually banned from OU to Ubers that weren't already restricted as a result of being box legendaries. These 2 were Salamence and Garchomp, and that was it. It was simple. Just 2 bans. Some clauses, and it's mostly just Gen 4 Pokemon without too much bells and whistles attached to it. But now in Gen 9, the amount of additional rules on top of this game is getting a little absurd, and in many ways they were necessary as a result of the massive power spike, the out-of-control balance, but some just view it as a bit inelegant to add so many caveats to a thing. The format itself has also been quite controversial just in terms of its actual gameplay, being very centralized around the Pokemon Goldengo, who completely changed everything with its incredible ability Good as Gold, which can block Defog. There is a severe lack of hazard removal in the format, which means that it centers heavily around hazard stacking, which not a lot of people love. Ogerpon Wellspring has quite a overwhelming presence, and so do Kingambit and Dragonite. Playing with Terastallization is also a completely game-warping thing that not everybody loves. On the flip side, some love Gen 9 because of Terastallization, which is a mechanic many people view as very skillful, as it can be used in many different ways, offensively, defensively, and for single-turn knockouts and such things like this. The nuance that this adds is appreciated by some, viewed as a form of skill expression. Gen 9 OU also has some very interesting team building with consistently odd and out there teams seeming to hit number 1, which I've covered in many videos on this channel. Despite the controversy and perhaps the inelegance of the rule set, the format does have a very distinct identity and stands out from any other format that has ever existed in the history of the series. Now for these usage-based tiers, I don't believe that I need to explain how they work, as each of them are basically just one level of power below the next one. In a sequence, I'm sure you understand how that works. But what I will do is take a brief look at the viability rankings of each of these usage-based tiers to give you an idea of what Pokemon are present in these formats. So we'll start, of course, with overused. At the top of the viability rankings here in the S rank is Dragonite and Zamazenta Hero, which is kind of crazy that Dragonite, a Gen 1 Pokemon, is one of the only two S-ranked fellas in Gen 9 alongside a literal box legendary. This is because Dragonite has benefited greatly from Gen 9's Terra mechanic, as it allows Dragonite beautiful opportunity to set up a Dragon Dance with the backing of its ability multi-scale, and also Terra Normal allows it to become a normal type with bonus damage on extreme speed. Also has other possible Terra types with defensive merit like Steel and Fairy. A very vast move pool of beautiful offensive options. Heavy duty boots to be completely immune to Stealth Rock. Dragonite is just benefiting so greatly from the Gen 9 environment. And it fits very well with the fast pace of the format too, being an ever valuable form of priority against a lot of fast attackers. I mean, a very reliable boost sweeper that just works extremely well. Zamazenta is also here, as I mentioned before, a unbanned Pokemon in Gen 9 that they tested out, deemed balanced in the tier as a result of checks such as Corviknight and Dondozo existing. Unsurprisingly, such a powerful legendary is perhaps the best Pokemon in all of OU. It is very fast, its stats are elite, it gains a defense boost as it switches in, and it has the move Body Press to take advantage of that defensive boost too. It can even use Iron Defense to boost up its defense stat and do more damage with Body Press. Every dog does have its day, a common sentiment. Proved correct here. Zamazenta is limited in its attacking move pool though, and some of its moveset options. It is not too difficult to respond to defensively, but still extremely powerful and metagame defining, something that you need to plan around. In the S- rank, we have Goldengo, who has had a massive impact with its Good as Gold ability, as mentioned before. Completely status immune, able to block Defog and Rapid Spin at the same time. Great Tusk is an extraordinarily powerful bulky ground type that is easy to fit on teams due to its excellent ability to check physical attackers, do good damage itself, remove items with knockoff, and remove hazards with Rapid Spin, as well as threaten the main spin blocker, Goldengo, very well with its ground type attacks. King Gambit is here in the S- rank as well. King Gambit, one of the most centralizing forces in OU with its incredible stats, typing, and access to Sucker Punch for priority, as well as the ability Supreme Overlord, which boosts the power of all of its attacks by 10% for each fallen ally, giving it extreme comeback potential and overwhelming power in an endgame scenario. Kyurem is in S- rank, an excellent legendary Pokemon with incredible offensive variety, being able to run Dragon Dance physical attacking sets, special attacking sets with choice specs, even mixed attacking sets with both physical and special options. And the final S- rank Pokemon is Tinglu, an excellent new bulky ground type who is known for its truly elite defensive stats, massive HP, an ability that suppresses the enemy's offensive potency, and excellent ability to set spikes and Stealth Rock and also whirlwind out enemy boost sweepers. Tinglu's move pool is limited, but it has those key options it needs, especially the hazards, and it is a very commonly used Pokemon for that purpose. Next we have the underused tier, the tier just below OU. In this tier, it is illegal to use anything OU or above. This is a tier where Pokemon are a bit less powerful but still very powerful, as evidenced by the S rank here, which features two Pokemon, Latios and Weavile. These are Pokemon that have been OU ranked in prior generations and are considered quite good. This is a great showcase of the power level increase of Gen 9 to have Latios and Weavile being UU ranked in its generation. Latios is a famous legendary Pokemon that has historically been very excellent. It's a Dragon Psychic type with the ability to levitate for ground immunity, very solid offensive stats, a high speed of 110 and a 130 base special attack. Latios has powerful options in its moveset, including Draco Meteor for massive dragon stab, Aura Sphere for fighting coverage. And interestingly, Latios has actually been buffed in Gen 9 with the new option of a buffed Luster Purge with 95 base power and a 50% chance to lower special defense by 1, a great wall-breaking tool. Latios has also received the new option of Flip Turn, which is a water-type pivoting move, finally giving it a pivoting move which it never had before. So Latios is just very strong, relatively bulky, special attacking dragon type. And Weavile is quite a straightforward, fast physical attacker with a great Dark Ice offensive typing, terrible defensively but great offensively. A classic glass cannon that aims to utilize such options as Knockoff and Triple Axle for big damage. Excadrill is also a prominent Gen 9 UU Pokemon, a historically excellent ground steel type mole with a tremendous attack stat of 135, the beautiful ability Sand Rush, which grants double speed. In the sand, for some synergistic purposes, also has Mold Breaker to ignore enemy abilities. Some great ability choices on Excadrill. It has key options like Rapid Spin, and its ground steel typing is also extremely elite. The main reason this Pokemon fell down to the UU tier was because of the presence of Iron Treads, a new ground steel type in OU that is pretty much exactly the same, but better, with a higher speed stat and better bulk overall, plus unique options like a Volt Switch. So Excadrill's sort of just been outclassed and forced into UU as a result of that. But the Pokemon fundamentally is still very powerful, and it enjoys being in UU, it likes it there. Excadrill is happy to be with his friends in UU. Lowkicks is my personal favorite UU Pokemon, who is A-ranked in the viability rankings, an epic new bug type released in Gen 9 with a bug dark dual typing, and the excellent ability Tinted Lens, which grants double damage if the enemy resists your attacks, basically erasing the resistance. This gives Lowkicks incredible neutral damage output with its moves, including First Impression with bug priority damage, U-turn, Leech Life, Knockoff, etc. Lowkicks may not have the greatest stats of all time with only 102 attack and 92 speed, but Tinted Lens is such a valued offensive ability that Lowkicks is actually a very strong Pokemon that is very prominent and consistent as a physical attacking wall breaker. I also think it's kind of funny and cool that Donphan has achieved UU rank in Gen 9. Actually a pretty impressive rank for this old elephant. A Gen 2 Pokemon, mind you. Donphan is of course far overshadowed by its new Paradox forms, Great Tusked Iron Treads, which are elite level entities dominating up in OU, but it's funny that down in UU we've got average Tusks here. Donphan, who operates as the next best thing. It's not as fast, but it has a ground typing, it's got a good defense stat, decent HP, and it's got Rapid Spin and Stealth Rock. And that'll do the trick. It's a good utility, physical wall that can dish out some good damage too, even outclassing the Pokemon celebrity Excadrill a little bit with superior bulk to offer to teams, and a better neutral typing perhaps for some scenarios. Well done to Donphan. Let's all give Donphan a round of applause in the comments down below, why don't we? Very well done. Next we have the rarely used tier, RU. In this tier you may not use any Pokemon ranked UU or above. In the S rank of RU we have 3 Pokemon, Slowbro, Crocodile, and Noivern. Slowbro is interesting because it's quite a strong Pokemon. It's got great defenses and a powerful ability Regenerator that lets it heal every time it switches. Slowbro also has quite a good move pool, options like Slack Off and Scald and Thunder Wave. But Slowbro does feel a bit weak in higher tiers in Gen 9, thanks to Water Psychic being kind of an undesirable competitive typing, with the Psychic part in particular opening you up to common Ghost and Dark type attacks. Slowbro is also outclassed by other Regenerator Pokemon that exist generally in the tiers above, such as Alamamola and Galarian Slowkick. But here in RU, the third highest usage-based tier, Slowbro is at the top of the totem pole, is considered an elite being, much better and bulkier and more consistent than many of its peers. Crocodile, also in the S rank, is kind of like a mini Landorus Therian type Pokemon. It's a ground dark type with Intimidate. Nice mix of offense and defense. You can see though that this is a little bit weaker than Pokemon in the tiers above, isn't it? Much lower stats. The power level is decreasing as we go down, but Crocodile in this particular environment where everything above is banned is that classic ground type attacker like a Landorus Therian or a Garchomp that does so well in tiers above. And then we have Noivern. And I think out of these three, this is the Pokemon that feels the most RU, if that makes sense. Noivern is a fast dragon flying type with a great speed of 123, but everything else about it is quite average. Weak offensive stats, not the best defenses either. But the Pokemon is alright, but you can see how this is a much weaker version of superior Pokemon like Latios and Dragapult, the higher tier dragon type attackers. But here in RU, Noivern serves a similar purpose to those Pokemon as like a mini version of them. It's fast, it has U-turn, it has a good attacking move pool with options like Draco Meteor, Hurricane, and Flamethrower. It even has disruptive options like Taunt and Roost. Also has Defog for some utility, and Infiltrator to power through substitutes. For a very long time, for much of my life, I thought that Noivern's eyes were these spherical hollowed out things that have a spiral pattern in them, but actually its eyes are below and they're yellow eyes. These are its ears and they're supposed to look like speakers. That's why it can boom burst. It's like a sound dragon. I never viewed it that way. I thought it had big weird hollow eyes and it always freaked me out, but now I'm not as frightened by it. I view it as a little bit more friendly than I used to, but I'm still a bit distrustful of Noivern. Next we have Never Used, and this is where we start to see a significant power decrease, as one of the S-ranked Pokemon is Flamigo, who is a mere flamingo. I spoke about Flamigo recently in my fighting type ranking, and some individuals responded to me and said, Jimothy, this is not a mere flamingo. He's actually shaped like a boxing glove, and that's why he's a fighting type. Because he's a boxing glove. I don't know, folks. I just look at this and I see a damned flamingo. I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe I'm stupid, but I'm pretty sure this is just a flamingo, which is just a bird from real life. Another flamingo insight, and apparently there were many of them. You've got an opinionated audience when it comes to Flamigo the Pokemon. I've had some real Flamigo discourse lately in my life. Some of you also said that he's called Flamigo because he's a friend, like amigo, Flamigo. I made the silly comment that they can't just subtract a letter from the name of a real animal and then ship that in the game, and I called them lazy for it, but you folks, you defended Game Freak, as you should. And you said, no Jim, it's genius wordplay, it's a Flamigo, because he is a friend. He's a friend to us. And we will not stand for your slander, Jimothy. We will not stand for your flamingo defamation. Alright, folks, you win this one. I cannot argue against your bulletproof logic. You got me. But regardless, Flamigo is the top tier S-rank Pokemon of NU. And you can see that this being an S-rank Pokemon says something about the power level. It's not the worst Pokemon ever. It's got a good typing and pretty good move pool with close combat and U-turn and such. But it is quite weak on the stats side. Only 90 speed, 115 attack. This is not really top tier Pokemon material when you just look at it at a glance, but considered a top dog in the lower power level environment of NU at least, so that is a point in your favor, Flamigo, and all of your friends will be very proud of you, as you have many friends and defenders, I've learned. Incineroar is also an S-rank Pokemon in Gen 9 NU. Surprising to many, I'm sure, because in doubles, this is one of the best Pokemon in the game. In singles, though, the move Fake Out is not quite as valued, and Incineroar is sort of just an average, slow, dark fire-type Pokemon that doesn't do much. In NU, I suppose, Intimidate and a decent move pool is enough to bring it to S rank, but it can't quite achieve much in the higher tiers. And then we have Monkey Dory, who certainly looks like a never-used Pokemon, doesn't he? Weird monkey. It is a legendary, but it's a weak legendary. It's not a very impressive legendary. Monkey Dory is a psychic poison type Pokemon. This Pokemon's relatively fast. 106 speed is not terrible. It's workable. It's alright in the bulk department with 90 special defense, not horrible. And its special attack is quite good too. But you can tell that this is sort of a middle of the road special attacker in the grander scheme of the whole game. Top tier in NU, but Anywhere above, it would not really have much of a place and would be outclassed by something superior. Up next we have the PU tier. This tier doesn't actually have an abbreviation that stands for anything. The tier name PU is a very funny joke because PU sounds like something stinks. You know, PU. Like a skunk just walked in the room in the Looney Tunes cartoon or something. And it's because these Pokemon stink. Now, as you know, I take Pokemon very seriously, and I think it's a bit of an insult to name a tier after a joke like this, and it's not even a very good joke, it's a bit disrespectful to the Pokemon involved. I'm not laughing at you saying that Bombardier stinks. Like, I don't think you should say that, because Bombardier might hear you. Anyway, in the PU tier, the Pokemon Florges is S tier. And this is an interesting one, actually. This doesn't really look like a PU Pokemon. Seems like a pretty solid Pokemon. It's a mono fairy type with an excellent special defense, decent special attack stat, and a usable HP. It's a pretty good special fairy type wall that also has the healing of Synthesis and Stab Moonblast and such. I think this is a case where there are just better fairy types in every other higher tier, and so Florges has been pushed out as there's no reason to use Florges in any other higher tiers since there's a better equivalent. But Pokemon's not that bad when you look at it, is it? It's just worse than the other options available. The other S rank PU Pokemon is Galarian Slowbro, and this one I can understand a bit more. Galarian Slowbro is outclassed in many different angles by its own self. Base form Slowbro is superior with a better stat distribution, and also Slowking Galar is more desirable with better stats too, and the option of chili reception. Galarian Slowbro is the strange middle child of the Slow family that's the worst of all worlds. Its stat distribution is odd. It's kind of wasting a bunch of stats in attack for no reason with 100 base attack, only 95 in HP and defense, 100 special attack. These stats are just not that amazing. It has the worst distribution of stats out of all the slow individuals. You can sort of see that Galarian Slowbro is not quite up to par, but in PU, it's certainly workable. It's a lower power level, so these stats aren't terrible in this context, and it's still Slowbro with the ability Regenerator, which is amazing, and all of the great move pool options that Slowbro has in its base form. So it's awkward worse Slowbro / Slowking that is usable in the PU tier, but terrible in higher tiers. PU is also unfortunately the home of the famous Wo-Chien, who was a legendary Pokemon, but you wouldn't think so when you look at it residing in the damned PU tier. Terrible fate for this Pokemon. Wo-Chien, unfortunately, despite having good stats and an alright move pool too, is just sort of dysfunctional, with Dark Grass being such a terrible typing. Weak to too many things to actually take advantage of its good bulk, outside of just terastallizing to a different type, and at that point, you might as well use a different Pokemon, honestly. Here in PU, it's a very good Pokemon, it's A rank, but being good in the A rank of PU is quite an insult to this legendary snail. I think it's quite an insult, and he certainly had higher aspirations for himself. Especially because Chin, Pao, and Chi-Yu are Uber's ranked, and Ting-Lu is one of the top Pokemon in OU. Wo-Chien is far below its brothers, and it's quite upset for that. It's quite isolated and lonely. And finally, the very bottom tier of the game is zero used. Pokemon here are so low in usage in every other tier that this is the only place that they may exist. It's the lowest power level you can get to in Pokemon. And technically it's not an official tier, whatever that means. Honestly, I don't even know what that means. I guess OU to PU are governed by Smogon staff or something, and ZU is governed by somebody else. I don't really care about any of that, so it's official to me in the ways that matter because it exists and I can play it. Anyway, in ZU tier, zero used, the top S-ranked Pokemon is Mesprit, who is the worst of its legendary trio. Mesprit, part of the funny trio of Gen 4, I forget what they're called, the funny genies, the funny pixies, the floating freaks, Mesprit, Azelf, and Uxie. They're famous, everybody knows them and what they're called. Mesprit, they're all mono-psychic types, but Mesprit is the most awkward one since it has a stat distribution that's sort of average even by legendary standards, with just 105 and a bunch of its stats in the middle, and then 80 HP and 80 speed, so it's not that bulky, not that fast, not that offensively threatening either. It sort of makes sense that it would end up in ZU with not much usage in higher tiers, or not enough to be ranked in those higher tiers. But here in ZU, Mesprit does at least have pretty high stats for the environment. 105 is a high stat value for ZU, and therefore it is the best of the worst here. Mono-psychic typing quite bad too, but you can work with that in the ZU world. And Mesprit has good moves like Stealth Rock, U-Turn, Knockoff, Psychic type attacks, various special attacks. I've just remembered it, I think they're called the Lake Guardians. Is that true? The Lake Guardians they are. Guardians of the Lakes. Mesprit, I would not entrust you with keeping that lake guarded. I don't think that you would be able to defeat even me. I could probably defeat you with a simple knock-off if I can manage that. You think I could learn knock-off? You sort of just slap their item out of their hand. That can't be too hard. And it's a high power move that removes their item and is super effective. I think I could take Mesprit and the lake would be unguarded. I would have full access to that lake Mesprit. And the other S-ranked Pokemon in ZU in Gen 9 is Venusaur, which is kind of crazy to see. Venusaur not so bad in prior gens, but in Gen 9 it's all the way down in the lowest possible tier. But when you look at it, it makes sense. These stats are just not good enough for modern times. They're even worse than Mesprit's stats. No stat over 100, just around 80 in most of the stats. It's just simply not good enough. And Chlorophyll won't really save you either. Venusaur is not that fantastic on Gen 9 OU Sun teams. There are better options now. So Venusaur doesn't have a place there either, really. Here it is in ZU though, where it's grass poison typing and strong move will at least make it good. In this lowest tier, at least it's not doomed to the terrible fate of being unviable in ZU. That would be embarrassing. ZU is also where you start to see random middle stage evolutions like Knackle stacked with the middle stage evolution of Garganical and can carry an Eviolite, considered an A- ranked Pokemon here. You also see Hisuian Sneasel as a prominent Pokemon in Gen 9 ZU. Outside of these usage-based tiers, though, there are even more ways to play competitive Pokemon. So if none of these are doing it for you, if you hate all of them, you're in luck, because there's even more options for you. The most popular of these options is Random Battle. And Random Battle is an interesting format, because this is a format where you don't have to build a team at all. This makes it perhaps the most accessible of all competitive Pokemon formats here, because you can just click battle and play without even building a team. Random Battle assigns you with 6 random Pokemon. The Pokemon aren't completely random in their movesets and items and such. It's not like you can get a Squirtle with auspicious armor or something bad like that. No, these are pre-curated sets, actually. All of the Pokemon in Random Battle, and there's a massive pool of them, have pre-made sets that are competitively viable and use the Pokemon to the best of their ability. Some Pokemon have multiple different possible sets they can have in Random Battle. And you may be thinking, well, what if I get a bunch of OU or Uber Pokemon and my opponent has a bunch of ZU Pokemon? Then I'm going to win easily. Well, folks, Random Battle is actually very interesting because it has something called level scaling. Higher tier Pokemon in Random Battle actually have a lower level. If you have a legendary or an OU ranked Pokemon, they'll probably be around level 70 or something. They deliberately lower their level so that they feel a bit more balanced. On the flip side, if you have a lower tier Pokemon, like for example a Tropius, they will have a higher level, up to the level 90s. And this makes all of the Pokemon feel sort of similar in power level. Of course, even in Random Battle there are preferred Pokemon, some Pokemon that are excellent, some that are not very good, but it's very interesting what is good and bad in Random Battle, because something like Tropius, for example, is actually really good in Random Battle. Because of the level disparity and the fact it has higher levels than most, plus its excellent sub-Leech Seed set and their Harvest combo, it's actually a very difficult Pokemon to deal with and a very strong one. Something like Vileplume is also very good in Random Battle, and maybe OU Pokemon can actually be bad because they're too low level, they're scaled down in power. Now yes, Random Battle is, of course, a high variance format. A lot of your success will depend on how good the Pokemon you receive are, but there is also a surprising amount of skill involved in Random Battle and working with what you're given creatively. Great players can take a subpar team and make miracles happen with it for a high win rate. To play Random Battle well is an elite skill. The format is very accessible because it doesn't require team building and you can just pick it up and play, but it also is hard to master and has a high skill ceiling. Whenever people who are new to competitive Pokemon ask me what format they should try, I always tell them to play Random Battle. It is the best entry point. is a great way to get used to the mechanics of the game, the type chart, and also gives you a glimpse at what proper competitive set looked like, as these are curated sets that are actually pretty accurate to what you would see in the more complex formats where you do have to build your own team and study the metagames a little bit more. These random battle sets are not too far off from what you would see there, and they also encompass all the different tiers because of their level scaling system, so you get a good idea of all sorts of different kinds of Pokemon. Up next we have Little Cup, which is one of my personal favorite competitive singles formats of all time. Little Cup is very fun. This is a format for baby Pokemon. You are only allowed to use Pokemon in this tier that are the first stage in their evolution line, and your Pokemon has to be exactly level 5. Little Cup is interesting because sometimes the good baby forms of Pokemon are not congruent with the good adult forms. For example, LA Kid is a very good baby Pokemon and is a great choice in Little Cup, but is not very powerful in its fully evolved state in any tier, really. Electivire is not fantastic. Mudspray, the little donkey, is also an elite bulky ground type in the Little Cup world, whereas Mudsdale, the fully evolved version, is not a great bulky ground type. It's outclassed by most other bulky ground types in the game. It's like a whole new world in the Little Cup. Everything's different. You're seeing faces you've never seen before, having a go in competitive Pokemon, and isn't that fun? But there's also items you've never seen before. Everything here can equip Eviolite, because they are all not fully evolved, so that is a top tier item. The Berry Juice is also an excellent item. Berry Juice heals a flat amount of HP, and since the HP values of these Pokemon are so low, since they're level 5, Berry Juice will often full heal your Pokemon. And so Berry Juice is an incredible item in Little Cup, and you have this full heal in the back pocket. Little Cup also feels very aggressive compared to other Pokemon formats. You can't really run stall here. There are defensive Pokemon, but usually even the defensive Pokemon have to be proactive and aggressive. This is because with such low stat values at level 5, everything just ends up dealing way more damage, so defensive gameplay is limited. I don't exactly know why that's the case. Something about damage calculation with low actual numerical values just leads to more damage being dealt all around. And this has a massive impact on the format. Little Cup is fast-paced, fun, totally unique, feels like a whole different world, and it's, I think, a really great option if you don't like some of the defensive gameplay in higher tiers. Little Cup is much faster paced. So if that sounds fun to you, I would strongly recommend Little Cup. Next we have National Dex, which is a fan-made format that came into existence in Gen 8. Gen 8 was a controversial gen because it was the first time that a significant portion of prior content was cut from the series. A bunch of Pokemon were just not available in Gen 8 at all. A lot of moves were cut, and mechanics were cut. You could no longer use Z moves or Mechas. This was controversial. A lot of players were not a fan of this. And so at the time, Smogon decided to create the National Dex format, which is a format that includes all past generation cut content along with the new content of Gen 8, so it could all coexist. And of course, National Dex persisted into Gen 9. Gen 9 National Dex includes everything in Gen 9 and every generation prior. This leads to a very chaotic metagame where you have Megas and Z moves, and all of the Paradox Pokemon, and impactful Pokemon like Goldengo. Everyone is here, and this leads to a scenario where there's stuff that's uniquely broken in National Dex that is not broken in normal OU. For example, Dragapult is banned from being used in National Dex because it is able to use a Z move with its option of Phantom Force for an instant massive ghost type attack that uses its physical attack stat. In Gen 9 OU, Phantom Force is a far worse attack that requires you to charge a turn with invulnerability to actually strike with it. It's very telegraphed, and Dragapult does not have a good ghost stab option. If it did, it would be far more powerful. This is a deliberate design choice. But with Z moves in the game, you can bypass this and just do a massive, huge ghost type attack with Dragapult, which is extraordinarily powerful, of course. So Z moves being present on Pokemon that were never designed to get Z moves introduces completely new possibilities. Some of them quite interesting and unique to National Dex, some of them a bit overpowered, like the Dragapult example. And all of the old titans, like the Tapus and the Ultra Beasts, coexisting with the Paradox Pokemon is also quite a fun idea. Everyone here duking it out in a massive free-for-all. Now, personally, I'm not very experienced with national decks. I've never been too interested in it, to be honest. I actually think that cutting a bunch of content was good, at least for singles formats, to sort of be a meta reset. Maybe for the single player games, they should have kept stuff in, because people like to collect all the Pokemon and whatever. But for competitive formats, it does make sense to cut some of the bloat, because Pokemon existing for so long, there's a bunch of content. And for me, National Dex is a bit chaotic as a result of that, but a lot of people like the format. I'm very glad that it exists, and I think that the fact that it exists is a beautiful thing. It's an option that the actual developers did not provide and that the community has provided. And some people primarily play this format because they like to have everything available, and they view it as the true competitive Pokemon experience. Next we have 1v1, and 1v1 is quite a cool format that is a pretty different way to play Pokemon. In 1v1, you bring a team of 3 Pokemon, and in the team preview you can see their 3 Pokemon, and you have to pick just one of your 3 Pokemon to battle them in a 1v1, as the name suggests. 1v1 is all about making the right call in the team preview, looking at what they're bringing, trying to counter what they bring with a smart choice of your own in a sort of more nuanced and complicated version of rock, paper, scissors, with more variables at play. 1v1 is really interesting because certain mechanics are really good in 1v1 that are terrible elsewhere. For example, stat dropping moves, just reducing the enemy's attack or special attack with a stat drop is really good because they can't switch out to remove the stat drop. Same with items that give you a temporary buff, like the Key Berry, which gives you a temporary defensive buff when struck by a physical attack. Not that commonly seen in other formats, but quite good in 1v1 because you're not worried about losing the boost on switch out. It's permanent since it's just a 1v1. Also, moves like Hyper Beam can actually be viable here because the charge turn is not a huge deal if you won the battle as a result of the damage from Hyper Beam. If you just defeated them, they only have one Pokemon and you've won the entire thing. So what does the charge turn matter? I think 1v1 is a fun format to play every so often as a change of pace because it feels totally different and the games are so quick as well. So you can really just knock out heaps of games in a short amount of time. It does sometimes feel like each individual game is a high variance thing where you're sort of guessing and there's a lot of luck at play, but at the same time there's a skill involved, I'm sure, with having a consistent record in 1v1 over time, and some of that comes down to creative team building, baiting, luring things in, and meta awareness as well. But it's a very accessible format, very easy to pick up and play. You can build a team quickly, or use a sample team, and the games are over quickly. It's probably pretty easy to learn as you just gain information over time. I believe in tournaments they play like a best of 7 or something, due to the fast and quick nature of each individual game. I think this is a great example of the advantage of competitive singles, is you can have like a fun side mode here that is a totally different way to play that feels fresh and is really fun in its own way. And I really wish the actual games had little modes like this for a change of pace, but you are unfortunately just kind of stuck with playing whatever the current BGC format is if you play official competitive. Up next we have Monotype, which is a format with some of the most interesting team building in all of competitive Pokemon in my opinion. In Monotype, your entire team has to share a common type. And this obviously opens up some real challenges, restricts how you can build defensive cores. Usually you want a bunch of Pokemon with different types to complement each other, but when you are challenged to have everything share one type, you face the common issue of your Pokemon all being weak to one type and that being a big problem. So you have to run interesting things to counteract this. For example, look at this Mono Fire team built by the player Captain Kraken. We have some pretty cool Pokemon choices here, such as Volcanion. Volcanion is a great choice because it has Water Absorb, which means that it's a rare switch-in to Water-type attacks. The rest of your team is weak to Water, you at least have this Water-immune Pokemon to patch that up. The Volcanion's also carrying an Air Balloon, which it wouldn't normally carry, but because the team is otherwise quite vulnerable to Ground-type attacks, this is very important. So Volcanion serves the purpose here of handling your weaknesses very well. The team is also using the interesting option of Talonflame as a bulky defogger. This is of course because Talonflame is a fire flying type, which is ground immune. So Talonflame is another option against ground type attacks. Talonflame also sets itself apart from Moltres with its access to defog, which Moltres doesn't get in Gen 9. So Talonflame is an interesting choice here. It's also very fast with U-turn. I think is a bulky pivot with flame body to spread some burn. Heatran makes sense here. Since it's neutral to Rock at least, Rock is probably going to be a tough matchup for this team, but at least Heatran's neutral to it. Volcanion can threaten Rock types with Steam Eruption. So building a well-balanced team when you're restricted to just one monotype is challenging, but the solutions to the problems that arise can be quite interesting, like as evidenced by this team, utilizing some uncommon Pokemon choices to patch up the weaknesses of being a full Fire-type team. So some monotype teams can manage to actually have a balanced structure that can handle weaknesses. Some opt to ignore their weaknesses entirely and go for very aggressive teams. Often Rock and Ice type teams are just full-on offense because those types struggle to patch up their defensive weaknesses. So it's very interesting the identity of monotype teams that form. Some types like Poison are pretty well suited to balanced structures because they're better at covering their weaknesses, whereas Rock is worse at it and therefore is more aggressive. Definitely an interesting way to play the game and to build teams that totally turns normal ideas on their head and requires a bit of creativity and ingenuity. Up next we have Create a Pokemon. This is a Pokemon format that features various custom fan-made Pokemon that are, in my opinion, very well designed and well thought out. I'm not exactly sure what the process is on designing these Pokemon, but I believe it's a collaborative effort on the Smogon forums, and each one is designed with intent to fill some role in the format. From what I remember, they designed the gameplay traits of the Pokemon first and then come up with a visual and name concept to fit that. Correct me if I'm wrong, folks, but I think that's how it's done. And some of these designs are so excellent that they feel like they could fit right into the actual games. My personal favorite is Mollux, who is this sort of weird lava lamp snail creature. Love his visual, looks very cool. The concept of a lava lamp snail is brilliant. I bet Pokemon is furious that they didn't come up with this one themselves. And then we have Miasmo as my other favorite guy. Miasmo is so awesome. It's a bug dragon type, which is a typing that doesn't exist in the actual games. And just look at this thing. It's such a cool visual concept here. Great name, great design. All around a slam dunk. Some other fellas include Cormodor, who is a cool bird with a backwards cap on. We even have, of course, Chugalong, who is a big train and a dragon poison type. Love that. I think these are some of the best fake Pokemon designs that you're going to find anywhere, especially because they are designed with great care to fit in a competitive context. Some of them do feel overtuned, but many of them I think feel very well balanced and fun to play with. I think this is another one of the coolest things that you can play on Pokemon Showdown and one of the coolest parts of the Smogon community. Now we move on to some other metagames, which are Pokemon formats with some really crazy rules and modifications. One of the most popular ones of these other metagames is Almost Any Ability, or AAA. In Almost Any Ability, you can give your Pokemon a far wider selection of possible abilities. Almost any ability in the game is available to be given to any Pokemon. Some abilities are banned, of course, particularly overpowered ones like Pure Power, Wonder Guard, Magic Bounce, etc. But most abilities are on the table, and you can have incredible combinations like, for example, this team, built by the player Lord Box, who has Motor Drive Corviknight. Motor Drive is an ability that grants electric immunity and +1 speed if struck by an electric move. With this, he's got Power Trip on the Corviknight and Bulk Up, plus Agility. So if he gets struck by an electric move, he gains speed for this sweeper set, which also boosts the power of the Power Trip. How interesting. The Zapdos here has Sheer Force. What a frightening concept, with a Life Orb. The Life Orb Sheer Force combo enhances the damage of moves with secondary effects, so Zapdos, already with a high special attack, can dish out insane damage here with Hurricane, Heat Wave, and Thunder. This is kind of a crazy set actually, with very inaccurate moves, but boy, if Thunder lands with Sheer Force Life Orb, that is a powerful concept indeed. King Gambit here has Adaptability for straightforward bonus stab damage. Fezandipity has Stamina to gain defense on hit, and Goldengo has Well-Baked Body, which is the ability of Duxbun, the bread dog. It grants fire immunity, and if struck by a fire move, you gain +2 defense. Beautiful ability for Goldengo, who is otherwise weak to fire. So it's just really interesting the combinations you can come up with here. There's also far more hidden information. When you're playing in almost any ability battle, the entire enemy team could have a much wider selection of abilities, and you have to scout out what they could have. There are common combinations that you can probably guess as well, but you don't truly know. Create some real team building opportunities, rebuild the identity of these Pokemon, and some ways you can patch up their immunities, and Gardevoir here has Prankster, which allows it to actually be viable with its unique set of utility traits that are then boosted by Prankster. This is a very cool format that is quite a high power level one because of the combinations you can come up with, but also a very unique one that a certain kind of player is going to really love. Up next we have Balanced Hackmons. This is a format where you are allowed to hack your Pokemon freely. With hacks, you can completely modify various things about Pokemon. You can change their ability to anything in the game, change their moveset to anything in the game, and also give them completely maxed out EVs, more than what is normally possible. This leads to some really game-breaking combinations, and in the format of pure Hackmons, there are absolutely no restrictions on what you can do, and you'll see stuff like Mega Mewtwo X with pure power, for example, absolutely tear teams apart. However, pure Hackmons I'm not featuring here because it's not queueable on Pokemon Showdown for Gen 9. But Balanced Hackmons is the other format where you can use hacked Pokemon. And in Balanced Hackmons, certain things are banned from being used, like pure power, Wonder Guard, moves like Last Respect, etc. In fact, I did a whole video about everything that is banned in Balanced Hackmons, if you're curious. Every ability, that is. And what you're left with is a more balanced version of Hackmons. Yes, you can use any Pokemon or most Pokemon in the game with any move or ability, but at least the truly broken stuff like Wonder Guard and Pure Power and all that is banned from being used, and so there is a bit more law and order to the format. This is a crazy format, and it's honestly very slow paced because everything is so bulky with max EVs, and also the best Pokemon in this tier is actually Chansey, funnily enough, because Chansey can give itself the ability Imposter to transform into an enemy. And because of the way transformation works, you keep your HP stat when transformed. And you can also keep your Eviolite boost from being not fully evolved. So when Chansey transforms into the enemy, it has Chansey's HP stat, which is 250 base, and then it also has the Eviolite defensive boost, no matter what you transform into. So you just become the world's bulkiest transformed Pokemon ever. For that reason, Chansey is the #1 Pokemon in all of Balanced Hackmons. And it kind of slows down the format when Chansey exists, because it disincentivizes boost sweeping since Imposter is so powerful. It is incredibly bulky when it switches in, it can scout movesets. I think Balanced Hackmons is novel and fun, but for many players it's not the best experience the more you play it, due to the fact that games can be incredibly slow. That said, I think Balanced Hackmons is an extremely skillful format where you have a huge amount of control, and there's actually a very limited amount of variance compared to other competitive Pokemon formats, in my opinion, because of consistent options to stop sweeps and the way win conditions work here. There's not a lot of fishing for hacks, and hacks can be very mitigated due to the fact that you can give any ability to anything and run powerful defensive abilities and items that mitigate poor fortune and variance. I think Balanced Hackmons will appeal to a very particular kind of player, and for that player it's probably the greatest format of all time, but it's certainly not for everyone. Up next is Godly Gift. This is quite a complex other metagame to explain, but it is very interesting. In Godly Gift, you have one Pokemon on your team that is the god of the team, sort of like a restricted legendary in VGC formats. So you have this god, and there is a dedicated list of Pokemon that are considered gods, often box legendaries and other powerful forces. And your god Pokemon will actually share its stats with the rest of your team based on their slot in the team. If you're in the first slot, you take the HP of the god. Second slot is attack, third defense, fourth special attack, fifth special defense, and sixth receives the speed of the god. So it's a very high power level format where you can buff some Pokemon significantly. For example, Hisuian Electrode is not a very good Pokemon in most formats. It's very fast, but it has a low special attack stat, so it's not that threatening. But in Godly Gift, you can replace its special attack stat with that of a powerful legendary, and suddenly you have one of the most incredible special attackers ever. Another example is maybe you've got a Shuckle, and Shuckle is known for having massive defensive stats but a very low HP. So what if you give it the HP of a godlike legendary, and now you have the bulkiest guy ever? I don't think Shuckle is actually used in this format, but it's just an example of a Pokemon with a low HP that could get incredibly buffed potentially by this godly gift system. And the slot that you choose to put the god in is the only slot that doesn't get shared with the team. The corresponding stat for that slot does not get shared. It's an interesting format because you can really get creative with team building and enhance Pokemon that are rather mediocre into absolutely incredible forces. And also, it's interesting because you have a lot of information, since you can see the enemy's team, see what their god is, and therefore extrapolate which Pokemon received which stat from the god. So you kind of know exactly what you're up against. I think it's a cool format. It's a little bit tough to get into, I think, because it's hard to build teams for it. You have a lot more to think about, but I think that this format would appeal to people who love team building, because team building becomes a really interesting puzzle here. I mean, it always is, but here you have so much more that you could maximize and optimize in every team as a result of each slot of the team even having an impact on how the Pokemon will operate in a battle. Very cool format. Up next we have Mix and Mega, which is a partially incomprehensible format where things are happening that you wouldn't believe. Mix and Mega is a format where you can give any Pokemon any transformation item, most notably the Mega Stones, but also stuff like the Rusted Sword of Zacian Crown. So you can give Pokemon these Mega Stones, and then when they Mega Evolve with that Mega Stone, they will receive the same stat boosts that Mega Pokemon receives, and also take on the ability of that Mega Pokemon. So for example, we have here a Magearna with a Latias Ite. A Magearna with the item of Mega Latias. So when this Magearna Mega Evolves in the battle, it will become a Pokemon with the same bonus stats that Mega Latias has on top of its own stats, plus the ability Levitate, which Mega Latias has. Obviously this is incredible, because Magearna is then an insane Steel Fairy type with Levitate, and way more stats. Here's a really cool one. This is Regieleki with an Altaria Knight. Regieleki, when it Mega Evolves, will gain bonus stats and also receive the ability Pixelate, turning normal type attacks into fairy type attacks, and this will give it a fairy type extreme speed and a fairy type explosion, giving a Regieleki some more coverage as a result of receiving the ability Pixelate. Also has a fairy type rapid spin, which could actually be useful to rapid spin in the face of ghost types. So those are just some ideas of how this Pokemon format can create newfound opportunities with the ability to Mega Evolve in the same way that another Pokemon does. I will say that this Pokemon is difficult to even begin comprehending how I would build a team for, with the amount of things you can possibly do. I sort of get a headache trying to think of it, but some have done so, and they've come up with something ridiculous like Regieleki with Altaria Knight, and for that I commend them. And I consider them to be geniuses. Up next we have Pokebilities AAA, which is perhaps a format where we are straying too far from good sense. In this format, much like almost any ability, you can choose an ability for your Pokemon to have from a list of pre-approved abilities that are not banned, like Pure Power. However, on top of them having an ability of your choice, they also have all of the other abilities that they would normally have. For example, Corviknight here has Intimidate. That's great, it has chosen to Intimidate. On top of having Intimidate, it also has Pressure, Unnerve, and Mirror Armor, all at the same time. So it's got 4 abilities. So if you lower its stats, it will mirror them back, it prevents you from eating berries, and it does the Pressure effect and Intimidate. This Clodsire might be the most evil Pokemon ever made. We have Thick Fat as an ability to reduce fire and ice type damage against you. Plus you have Unaware to prevent stat increased Pokemon from dealing any damage to you. And you have Water Absorb to be immune to water. And you also have Poison Point. All at the same time. Goodness gracious. I also must note that Pokebilities is its own other metagame, where the only gimmick is that Pokemon have all their abilities at once. But for some reason that format is not considered good enough to have its own queueable ladder. You can't play that on the ranked ladder. But Pokebilities AAA, Pokebilities plus another ability on top, that's available on the ladder. So this is the one you can play. Because there weren't enough abilities in the initial pitch. We needed more abilities. I think that these Pokemon should be thankful that they even get one ability. To have 4 abilities all working in tandem is maybe a little bit absurd. Maybe we've gone too far. Is it possible that there's such thing as too many abilities? Up next is the other metagame called Shared Power, and this one's crazy. In Shared Power, every single time you send a Pokemon out onto the field, it will then instantly share its ability with the rest of your team. And each time you send in a new Pokemon, it then shares that ability with the rest of your team, and at the end of it you can achieve 6 abilities on all of your Pokemon. So you can create some really interesting synergies here. For example, here we have a Hisuian Lilligant that has Hustle, which is an ability that grants 1.5x attack at the cost of reduced accuracy down to 0.8x, usually a bad ability that's inconsistent. But then you combine it with No Guard from Golurk here, and when you send in Golurk, it gives the whole team No Guard, which means that all of your moves are perfectly accurate, cancelling out the downside of Hustle and giving you all upside. Then you can start going crazy with Scrappy and Mousehold, who has Population Bomb and Technician, and suddenly you have bonus attack on this guy, perfect accuracy, so that the Population Bomb can't miss, Scrappy so you can hit through ghost types, and boy is this just one of the most insane teams ever. Developed in a lab by a mad scientist whose name is Lonely Litten, sorry. Yet another format for team building freakazoids, where you can come up with some of the most incredible concoctions of all time, such as Mousehold Population Bomb Spam Gaming. Also another format that is a little bit incomprehensible with the sheer nuance and possibilities at play, with 6 abilities potentially in play on both sides of the field in a battle, plus the pacing of trying to switch guys in strategically to give the abilities to everything else, and trying to deny your opponent from doing the same. Goodness me. And finally we have the other metagame, STABMons, which is also queueable on the ladder, and the final metagame I'll talk about here today. I like STABMons because it has a concept that is far easier to understand than some of these other formats. In STABMons, your Pokemon are able to learn any move that shares a type with them. For example, Landorus Therian here is able to learn the move Dragon Ascent, which is usually exclusive to Rayquaza, but since it's a flying type, it can learn any flying type attack or ground type attack in the game. With Dragon Ascent, it now has a much more powerful flying stab option and is significantly better. It can also learn Headlong Rush, which is usually restricted to Ursaluna and Great Tusk and a few other Pokemon, but now Landorus Therian can get it for far more damage and far more of a threat level. Volcarona here has Blue Flare, borrowed from Reshiram. Goodness gracious, because it's a fire type and it can learn any fire type attack. Goldengo has Tachyon Cutter and Moongeist Beam. I think you get the idea. Whatever the strongest signature moves that are usually scarce options that are available in your type, you can just chuck them on your Pokemon with no worries, and this creates a serious metagame shift and opens up options you would never even believe. Like for example this Mamoswine, who has Shore Up, which is a ground type healing move, usually exclusive to Palisand. Now Mamoswine has a healing option. Mamoswine can also get Glacial Lance, an incredible ice type physical attack usually exclusive to Calyrex Ice Rider. Now any ice type can just get it. This is a massive buff to Mamoswine, who is way better as a result of all these new moveset options it can get. Toxapex can get Malignant Chain and Flip Turn for a form of pivoting and a form of status inflicting. That's a frightening thought, and you can therefore afford to run Assault Vest Toxapex and run all attacks on it. Mortal Spin as well is a more widespread form of hazard removal now, usually exclusive only to Glimmora. Now any poison type can get Mortal Spin, meaning they are more prominent as hazard removers in this format. STABMons really shifts the identity of Pokemon of certain types, generally increases the power level, and changes the game dramatically. Thank you for listening, folks. I hope that I have demonstrated the amount of variety on display on Pokemon Showdown and how many different formats you can play, all of which have dedicated communities. I think by far the best part of the competitive singles community is the sheer variety of different ways people have come up with to play Pokemon. Yes, some of these are kind of convoluted and crazy, like Pokebilities, almost any ability, but goodness gracious, am I glad that such a format exists. Why not just make something wacky? Why not have fun with it? What is your favorite format I talked about in this video? Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you for watching.